Hi, welcome to BA 461, Organizational Behavior. I thought that I would go ahead and record a few small lectures for those of you who find it helpful. It's not required, but it is something that I've gotten feedback on some of my other classes, so I thought I would go ahead and do it for this course. I'd like to start out by talking about what an organization really is. When you think about the term organization, what do you think of? What comes to mind? And why are organizations formed in the first place? So organizations typically are considered a group of people coming together for some sort of purpose, and usually we think of an organization of having a minimum of 3 people, although most of us will work in organizations that are larger than that. And as I mentioned, organizations are formed for a specific purpose. So usually that means that the organizer has something in mind, a project, a goal, a mission that's larger than one person can do by themselves. Thus we bring in other people and form an organization to accomplish what it is we want to accomplish. And that really brings us to our course study this term, which is about the behavior of people within organizations. Organizations are social entities, and they're made up of individuals. People, humans, are very complex. We're unique. We're all different, and that means that we bring different perspectives, different ideas, different ways of doing things to the place that we work, or whether it's a profit or a nonprofit organization. So in this course, we're going to look at a number of theories that will help explain things about why people do what they do, how people function in groups as individuals, what motivates people, and that sort of thing. Much of what we study here will come from the field of psychology as well as other social sciences, and I think you'll find it really helpful as we work through the term. But as we grow our organizations, we begin to add additional people, and then we find that as it gets larger and larger, we tend to form groups or teams, and we bring a number of people together in these groups or teams, and that increases the complexity of our organization exponentially because we're bringing all these diverse, unique people together trying to move in the same direction to accomplish the same goal. And in doing so, because of the differences and the different perspectives and agendas, you'll find that often we introduce tension, conflict, power struggles, and politics into organizations. And that is part of what we're going to talk about this term as well. Then we look at adding to that people who are impacted by the organization or stakeholders. Stakeholders, pretty much anybody who's affected or perceived that they are affected by the organization. I like this chart. I use it a lot in a number of my classes. If you look at the bullseye and we start in the center, you'll see that it's marked internal stakeholders. These are those who are closest to the organization, who are most intimately involved with it. And that's why we see employees, owners, board of directors, that sort of thing. And then the next layer out are those who are very closely tied to the organization. And so we have our closest stakeholders, people like customers, competitors, and also government entities, because many organizations are in industries that have regulations they deal with, whether it's food safety, environmental standards. I know in healthcare we had a number of rules and regulations we had to follow. There are privacy, confidentiality rules. So this next layer very much affects those in the organization as well. The final layer out, or the blue circle towards the outside of the bullseye, are what I like to think of as macro environmental issues. And these are forces that affect the organization but are really out of the organization's control. So for instance, the economy, economic swings up and down, the strength of the dollar, new breakthroughs in technology, demographic trends, politics, that sort of thing. And all of these are important and need to be taken into consideration as we run our organizations. So why are organizations so complex? And why are we devoting an entire term to the behavior of those in them? Well, as I mentioned, organizations start with an individual, a small group of individuals. And as I mentioned earlier, they're very unique. We are human entities that are complex and yet very unique in our own way. And so that means that as we come together in groups or teams, we share our differences, and we hopefully will be better and stronger because we bring together many different strengths. But we also bring together differences of opinion, and we can that can lead to tensions that need to be resolved. We then add more layers to an organization as we grow and expand. We can add departments, we can add satellite offices, manufacturing plants, corporate offices, and so now we have many layers that are all trying to work together. And think of a rowboat where everyone's trying to row at the same time in the same direction to get to one place. And lastly, we now have to take into consideration the fact that we are functioning in a global environment, so that with globalization we're no longer just a local market, that we are open and impacted by things that happen around the world. So you can see that organizations are really quite interesting and at the same time very complex. So throughout this course, I will add some additional information from different sources as well as from the textbook. And the definition that you see in front of you for organizational behavior is one of those times. The definition in your book is great, but I thought I'd throw another one out there. I like this because of its simplicity. The study of what people think, feel, and do in and around organizations. So very broad definition. But notice the key word here is people. And so knowing what people think, knowing what people are feeling, those are difficult things to nail down. And interpreting what this all means is very important in the field of management and leadership. So how do we know our organizations are successful? We use two primary measures for that, and those measurements are called effectiveness and efficiency. So I've given some ideas here under organizational effectiveness, but what it really means is, are we marching towards our mission, our vision, our goal? So are we serving the purpose that our organization was built to serve? So for instance, if we want to stamp out disease, and that's our purpose for building our, say, nonprofit, but then along the way we start getting into the business of making money manufacturing t-shirts or something else that takes on a life of its own and becomes its own mini business completely separate from our mission, then that's not an effective use of our organization. Efficiency is pretty much what it sounds. It's an efficient use of resources. A lot of people, when they think of efficiency, think of cost cutting, and this is not cost cutting so much as it is a wise use and matching of resources to purpose, both human and financial. So I mentioned stakeholders, and along that line we want to remember that it's important to also talk about our values and talk about ethics as we make decisions within our organizations, particularly when people are involved. And this sort of raises these stakes just a little bit higher. And this whole theme of values and ethics will be a thread that we will carry throughout the course. And along with that, we'll visit the concept of corporate social responsibility, which means that it's really about being a good citizen. Organizations have been given the ability to function as an entity within society, and corporate social responsibility suggests that it's important for them to be good citizens and to give back and to think about the world around them, not just their own organization. I mentioned globalization. It's another driving force of what's changing our world as managers and leaders in organizations. And really, globalization is about connectivity. It's about connecting the various areas of the globe into one an open world. And primarily in organizations, when we think about globalization, we're really talking about not just all three of these: economic, social, and cultural, but we're talking about one global economy. It used to be that we function in local and regional economies, then national economies, but pretty much now we are functioning in a global society with a global economy. We know that if there is a mortgage crisis in the United States, as there was in 2008, that it rings around the world, unfortunately. We also know that disease travels around the world, that we are very, very, very connected, and our world is shrinking. So we compete and for products, services, customers, supplies around the world. Another phenomenon that is increasing in the workplace today is diversity. We're seeing more and more diverse groups coming together in the workplace, which again adds to the complexity of our organizations and our need to be really skilled in managing people. And so diversity is another thing that we'll see throughout the term here. You have a chapter in your book that really deals with this, and it looks at a variety of diverse categories like demographic, age, gender, ethnicity, but also when we talk about diversity, we're talking about socioeconomic groups, education, all kinds of differences. And we will also visit this concept of employees in the workplace and what makes a satisfied employee. Is there a correlation between satisfied employees and employee performance? And if so, then work-life balance becomes very important, both to the organization and to the employee. We also know that many of us are being challenged to work virtually, either in teams or communicating with people within our organization or outside our organization at a distance. So you may need to talk to a customer or a supplier who's in Romania or Peru or anywhere around the world. So because of that, culture becomes very important. And when we talk about culture, we're talking about many different types of culture. So a general definition would be the set of beliefs and values that are shared by members of a specific or given group. And these values and beliefs sort of determine how we behave as a group, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And we educate our new members, whether they're born into our culture or join our culture. We pass on our patterns of behavior and what we value in terms of good and bad, right and wrong. We pass those on to new members of our group. And those values help set us apart from other cultures. Now, we can, it's important to consider that culture is very strong and very powerful in organizations. And it can be very positive in that it introduces when we have several cultures, it's like diversity, and we have many diverse ideas. On the other hand, it also brings some differences. And an organizational culture really shapes how an organization does business. The values that an organization has determine the decision-making processes, communication channels, and rewards, punishments, many different things. So culture becomes very important. And here are some of the key characteristics that I was mentioning early. And this last point where it talks about culture being stable and dynamic, it is. Culture is changes rather slowly, and this can be, an organization that has a strong culture can be a positive factor in change and change management, but it can also be a negative factor if it's so entrenched and it's a culture of status quo as opposed to a culture of adaptation. So really interesting, and later on there's an entire chapter in your book towards the end that we'll spend a lot more time on. There are two aspects of culture. There's the visible part that we see, and then there's sort of the hidden part, that those are those beliefs and the value system that we were just talking about. Outwardly, it's language is one. You probably have been part of an industry where they have their own language. Accountants have their own language, right? In healthcare, we have all kinds of, and engineers have their own language. So that's also part of our culture. But visible things can be the physical setting. Is the workspace open, or is it closed? Are people housed behind closed doors, or is it an open space? Is it light? Is it airy? Does it have a playful atmosphere? That sort of thing. So we can actually see tangible, what we call artifacts of a culture as well. So speaking of diversity and in our organizations and a variety of cultures, I mentioned that one of the important benefits of diversity is the ability to bring in a variety of ideas, innovative thinking, and looking at the world a little bit differently, sharing ideas and solving problems in a way that we might not have thought of by ourselves, looking at a situation from our one perspective. And so it can be particularly helpful in helping an organization adapt and change. However, with those differences also come some frictions and some tensions. And so it's important for people within organizations to understand how to deal with those challenges and conflicts. And that's something that we'll be talking about as we move through this course. You can see here, I took a chart from your textbook which shows diversity in the United States population based on 2013. So it's a couple years old. And you can see there is a bit of a shift, and your book talks about this in terms of different groups that are growing, expanding. And I would also say the variety of groups is much larger than what this shows. Another aspect of diversity that your book talks about, and I won't spend a lot of time on it because I think your textbook does an awfully good job of describing various generations. And it's always fun to look at the different generations, what makes them tick, and kind of the world in which they came of age. So when we talk about generations, what defines us often in our generation is what's happening in the world around us, particularly as we become young adults, where we really begin to focus in on what's happening around us. If you grew up during the Depression, you probably have a much different outlook on the world than if you grew up in the go-go years of the dot-com boom, right? So if you grew up during a time of war, that would be much different. So it's important to understand the context in which these various generations found themselves. And technology has really changed our generations as well. So now we have about 4 generations in the workplace for the first time. Some of that is because people are living longer, they're working longer. They're also working longer because of the economic crash of 2008 really hurt and decimated a lot of 401ks and savings plans for our older workers. Another type of culture besides organizational culture is national culture. And so that's part of the diversity that we see in our workplace. But it's also the diversity that we see among our customers, suppliers, vendors, all kinds of groups that we work with. The seminal work that really kicked off this whole area of study was conducted by Gerhard Hofstede, and he worked with IBM. His whole idea with sticking with one company was he wanted to sample employees around the world, but he didn't want differences to be attributed to different organizations, so he wanted to do it within one organization. And IBM had over 100,000 employees in over 40 countries that he was able to survey. And this massive work resulted in about 5 cultural dimensions that have really stood the test of time. Since then, we've had some other important studies that have added to this work. But when we look at this, it helps define cultural dimensions in various groups. Another really important work that is still ongoing is called the Globe Study. And this really looks at leadership and behavior in organizations. Very important longitudinal study. It's just beginning, I believe it's third phase. And so we have a great deal of data from this. And because of this, some additional dimensions have been added to Hofstede's original 5. So why is this important? Cultural understanding is really important because of this theme that we've been talking about, which is diversity within our workplace, but also within the world. And that as a global society now, we are often in contact with other cultures. And so having a cultural mindset helps us communicate and function much better and understand other cultures. So here's a chart from your textbook that I liked, and so I thought that I would talk about it just briefly. There are 3 primary areas that we want to look at in terms of our mindset, cultural mindset. The first is cognition, so this is our thinking. So are we aware, are we self-aware? Are we self-aware of culture? Do we understand how we think and problem solve in our own culture as well as others? Behavior and what we do and how we act. Do we understand why we behave the way we do and how we react to certain situations? And then skills, how we work with others and adopting different cultural lenses. Are we able to change those lenses and really view cultures from the other perspective? And today, as we look at differences with individuals beyond culture, we start looking now at individuals in our organizations. So we're starting to circle back to the beginning of this lecture when I said as an organization forms, it starts with a very few individuals and then branches out from there. And so in our study, we are going to do the same thing. We're going to start with understanding the individual employee or individual manager or person inside an organization. What makes them tick, what motivates them, all of the various aspects of human behavior with the individual within the workplace. And then from there, we will expand to the next level, which will be teams and groups, and then we'll talk about more about communication and that sort of thing, and then we'll expand into the larger structural aspect of the larger organization. So starting with the individual, who are we? Why are we the way we are as individuals? And your book talks about one theory, which is the interactionist view, which talks about a mix of heredity and environmental influences. And so this is an age-old question. How much of who we are is determined by heredity and how much is determined by our environment? And those who subscribe to this point of view would say it's both. Although, as your textbook points out, more and more credence has been given to heredity than was in the past. So it'll be interesting to see what the upcoming research on this shows. So in terms of characteristics that we look for, as managers and leaders, there are things that are important for us to understand, and those are skills, abilities, and personality. They really affect who we are in the workplace. So you can see on the screen, skills are really the talents that we have that are related to specific tasks or jobs. The abilities are more like aptitude. They're natural talents, innate talents, whether they're mental or physical. So you could be superhuman strong or extremely intelligent, and that would be an ability. And then personality is the set of psychological characteristics that makes each of us unique. And that's also a very difficult area to understand and wrap our heads around. With skills and abilities, it's important to know that in organizations, we look at 3 different types, particularly in the workplace. And we talk a little bit about this in human resource management class as well, when we're talking about hiring and matching people to jobs and training and development and that sort of thing. But we look at technical ability, which is obviously knowledge, specific knowledge of the job process or processes that need to happen. And then interpersonal, how well people work with others. And conceptual, our ability to problem solve, our cognitive ability. And so when we think about employees in the workplace and how everybody fits together, we'll consider those as well. And in trying to unlock this complicated field of personality, there's been quite a bit of research. One of the most successful research areas has been on what we call the Big 5 personality traits. And those are on the screen before you. And various combinations of these are prevalent, according to the research, in each of us. Some of us will think of each of them as a spectrum, and so we'll be high or low on spectrums. There is no good or bad, it's just who we are, and it's a mix of all of these different things. Now, we do know that in terms of leadership, there are certain characteristics that seem to correlate with perceived excellence in leadership. But it doesn't mean that you can't be an excellent leader without, but there are some patterns that we look for. Another type of common analysis or actual personality test is called the Myers-Briggs, and I took this chart also from your textbook. This highlights a few categories for the Myers-Briggs test and personality view, but it's an extremely complex. There are 16 different categories or outcomes, I should say, and on 4 different dimensions. And it's really about how people process information and problem solve and that sort of thing. And again, there isn't a good or a bad, but it helps us understand who we are and how we relate to other people. So it's very interesting. I don't know if any of you have had the Myers-Briggs done, but it is, it's really an interesting test to take, and I would actually recommend. Another thing that we look at in terms of personality in organizations is what we call a proactive personality. Proactive people believe that they can somewhat control the events in their lives and make positive things happen. And so they tend, because of this, they tend to be happier at work, they tend to have a higher job satisfaction, and be more entrepreneurial and that sort of thing. So depending on your workplace, this type of personality can be a great addition. And in looking at individuals and organizations, another really important area to talk about is emotional intelligence. I bring up emotional intelligence in every single class that I teach, so, and I know a couple of other instructors do as well. It's something. It's a theory that some research has been conducted on, actually a lot, and the jury is still out in how in their researchers' ability to really quantify this as a success in organizations. But I can tell you from a practical standpoint and as a boots-on-the-ground manager, I totally subscribe to this and believe in it and follow it. Sometimes it's difficult to replicate what happens in the real world in a research study because you're dealing with people's moods, people's situations, and how they answer questions on any given day can change based on those things. So emotional intelligence has these 4 primary characteristics. The first is self-management, our ability to control and redirect disruptive moods or impulses that we feel, and regulate that in our own behavior. Self-awareness is our ability to recognize and understand and reflect on our moods and what drives we have, and then also how they affect the people around us. Social awareness is the ability to understand the emotions of others and then be skillful in responding accordingly. And then social skills include, effectiveness and leadership and change management. So emotions are a really hot topic right now in organizational behavior. And emotional labor, emotional dissonance are negative aspects of those. Emotional labor and emotional dissonance are negative aspects of emotions in the workplace. And emotional labor, as you can see on the screen, is having to express the desired outward emotions that the organization wishes during, say, service transactions. So if any of you have worked in a call center, you can understand where the customer is always right, how difficult that can be. Emotional dissonance occurs when employees are asked to project one emotion when they feel the other. So if you want to apologize to a customer because you feel the organization has been wronged, but you're required to have the opposite response, that might create what we call emotional dissonance, where you feel that you're being dishonest when you want to be honest. And so both of those are very destructive over time, and it's important to try to eliminate them from the organization. And that, underlying those are our concept of personal values and the importance of that. When people are looking for jobs in organizations, one of my key pieces of advice is to try to really ferret out what the values of the organization are and make sure that they're compatible with yours. Also, the culture. Where organizations spend their time and money will really indicate what they value. And if they're spending their time and money on employees, that's usually what they value. And so those are great places to work, typically. And so what you also want to do, though, is look to see if your personal values are in line with those. And our values are something that are shaped, like our personality, are shaped pretty early as we grow up. They're influenced by those who raise us, our parents, our families, our teachers. They may be influenced by religion, by our culture, background, history, circumstances, all kinds of things. And so it's important to be aware of those. And we have a couple of different types of values. And these are, you probably have talked about these or will talk about these in ethics class or read about them in when you're in that class. So we won't spend a lot of time on it. But something to be aware of are taking a look at these two different types of values and how they work. And then Redden has an inventory that you can go through in terms of figuring out how, where you lie on the value system and being able to identify your values and kind of order them and what's important to you. And I might suggest also, while we're talking about this, that there are a number of self-assessments in your textbook, and I do recommend that you take a couple of minutes and actually work through those. They're really fast, but they'll give you some insight not only into yourself, but they'll also give you some insight into the concept of what we're talking about, and that's really a great benefit of those. In terms of our personal development, morally and ethically, Lawrence Kohlberg is a very acclaimed ethicist who has done a lot of work in this area. And you can see from this chart, which I took from your textbook, that he sort of ordered our progression over time in how we make moral decisions. And it's really our development and our growth in that area. The good news is that we tend to continue our moral development as we mature, and so we do continue to grow and develop. So I want to thank you for watching the lecture, and please let me know if you have any questions. Don't forget to jump on the discussion boards. Remember, we have 2 deadlines. There's the deadline for the first post, and that's usually the Tuesday before its the final deadline, which is at the end of the 2-week module. If you miss the first deadline, you will still get points, you just won't get maximum points. And it's something that I encourage students to do, is to jump in early so that we can get dialogue going, so that people aren't up late the last night trying to cram everything in. So if each of the modules will also have a quiz and a case study. So take a look at Canvas and let me know if you have any questions. I hope you're enjoying your term, and I look forward to spending more time online with you. Thank you.